We steward and cultivate donors, and we educate them through inspiration, because education is a huge part of what we do in nonprofits, and especially when people give. Next slide. The goals for today's conversation, I'll just go over them quickly, so hopefully you'll leave with these and know what you're getting into, is to have a strong understanding of Giving Day campaign communication strategy, feel more prepared to start your Give Big campaign communications, and you'll leave with an idea of a story and how you see that story connecting back with your organization's mission and vision as you jump into writing and the whole production of data and building your communications for Give Big. Do you guys have any questions for me? No, we're good. Okay, before we dive into the actual work, I also want to let you know that we're just going to look at one Giving Day campaign that we partnered with a children's hospital in Texas on. And I know Texas, it's weird. I didn't really know what we were getting into down there because everything's bigger and more intense and we don't know their donors. I know Pacific Northwest donors. But so it was an interesting challenge. But instead of showing you 5 or 6 different examples and getting kind of lost in the shuffle, I've left webinars feeling like I learned a lot, but also like I was in a pinball machine. And so instead of a bunch of examples, we'll just go through the one. So you want to do the next slide? So last year, the Children's Health team, the foundation at Children's Health, which is a hospital in Texas, it's the 2nd largest pediatric hospital in the state. They came to us and they said, you know, we had a really good Giving Day campaign, which theirs is North Texas Giving Day in 2021, but we didn't love our story. We didn't love how it landed. We didn't really feel like it was that inspiring. So we spent some time looking at their communications and we saw that everything was in 3rd person. The tone of their emails was really fundraising focused. You can see in their message that it was give now, which feels kind of demanding and instructional. The average word count was 295, which is a lot for an email. And there were a whole bunch of different perspectives. But they had some good results. They raised a whole bunch of money. But when we also looked at the email, we were like, oh, you're featuring Carlos, who's this super cute kid who went through this heroic experience of needing a heart transplant when he was just 3 years old. And from the looks of it, he's doing pretty darn well, which is impressive because there aren't a lot of places on this planet that can put a new tiny heart that's like the size of a tangerine into a small child who needs it. So we were like, we wanted to know more about Carlos. Next slide. And this is an example of one of their emails, and this is only part of it. It just kept going. There's a lot of text. There's a pull quote that's exceptionally long. You see the mention of COVID. You see that there's a child life specialist. It's talking about giving, but the quote is from his mom, or that was another email, a huge quote from the child life specialist. And we wanted to focus more on the patient family experience. So next slide. So our approach was to focus on the actual patients being featured this year. There was a call to action at the bottom of this, but this was essentially the first email that all, 20,000 of their donors got. And it was directly from Tanner, who is a patient, and he explained his diagnosis, what he had, and how Children's helped him every day and his brother live a healthier life. And the secondary mention was, did you know North Texas Giving Day is coming up? Next slide. Because we're a children's hospital and not everything had to be so serious as it is in healthcare oftentimes, we went with fun. And this email, the hello, meet our sons, was the email. It was the second email, and it surprised us all when it had the best open rate of their digital asks over the last few years. It just really blew it out of the water. And again, it tells a very similar story. It builds on the story that Tanner started, which was, I'm a mom of 2 boys who make me laugh every day, and were also born with a life-threatening illness, cystic fibrosis. And it's a mom talking to the donor, and that's a big part of what we love about doing these campaigns. It's an opportunity to completely close the gap between the donor and the person who is benefiting from the support. We almost take the organization out of it and make them a supporting character. And so instead of give now, the opportunity was give families like ours hope. And she really built on that story and shared some personal experiences. And in first person, it means you don't have to do all of the fun stuff that is required to highlight a quote. Next slide. And so, like their previous emails, we did have different perspectives, including their Tanner and Caleb's doctor, their physician. Her voice was really important because she had the opportunity to tell the donors, the audience, why supporting children's health is important to her and what she does in her job every day to take care of kids. So again, our give button, give now, was not a demand. It was, your generosity becomes tomorrow's breakthrough therapy. And in her role, and if you had clicked through and watched their video and read their full story online, you'd hear about the fact that kids with cystic fibrosis used to hardly make it past elementary school. And Tanner and Caleb are likely to live into their 30s and 40s. And so we really are telling a bigger story as much as we are about telling a direct patient story, but how Children's Health in this hospital is a real contributor to improved treatments and improved care. Next slide. So our success was every perspective was in first person. The tone was, instead of you should donate, it was gratitude for patient care. We cut the word count by almost 100, and it was one family's medical journey. I think for such a complex disease, explaining CF is challenging, and that's what nonprofits do. We tackle really complex issues, and they're hard to explain. And I want to make a note about gifts from out of state, because people move all the time. And I grew up in Tacoma, and there are nonprofits that no matter where I live, today I live in Bellingham, I will always support them. So that was really an important piece of data that just like was a good reminder for us, because we were thinking of, we had this like tunnel vision of this region in North Texas. So even it's just something that we were like, oh, that should be top of mind. We know this. And we raised more money. We increased giving by 31%. And what the Children's Health marketing team was most excited about was the fact that 15% more of their hospital employees gave. And that is one of the hardest audiences in a healthcare system, because our healthcare workers work so hard every day and they give so much. And for them to see this story and make a gift on top of all of their gifts that they give, their talent and their compassion, was a real win for us, because it felt like we were representing them really well. And they were happy to see these patients, no matter what specialty or area of care they work in. Next slide. So where to begin? Our writers and our team champion telling stories. We talk a lot about topics in our world, like their lack of green spaces, which is a great topic. That's an important one. But a story is a child's life is transformed by summer camp. Stories have characters, which can be lots of different things. They have conflict, which means there's a problem. And if a problem isn't met, there are consequences. And the solution is change. That's the opportunity we can give people in our community, whether it is they are giving $10 or $1,000, that they can be a part of that change. So we choose one story. And if you screenshot one slide, it might be this one, just to help you focus on answering that check step, that question. Does my email campaign have characters? Do I demonstrate a conflict? And how am I giving the people I'm asking to support this conflict the opportunity to help solve that problem? Next slide. And like many of the children's health emails before and others, we always need a call to action. And we might think that call to action is to give us all your money or some of your money and a little bit more than that. But if we think of giving as an opportunity to increase access to healthcare, or think of giving as a contribution that can keep families together, or participating in a vision that will make our community more equitable, that perspective can have a huge impact on your writing. We often think we need to really educate our donors, and we do, but if we can do that through inspiration and connection, if we can give people hope, we live in a world that's stressful enough, and donors are just like us. They're people who know a lot of this stuff and already believe in you. So that's an important perspective that we want to take in our writing, is that we want to build a relationship with our donor, deepen that relationship, and respect them for all that they know. And one last note on somewhere in your emails, in every single one, it's really helpful to explain what fund you are asking donors to support and why that fund matters, because it's good trust building, it's good relationship building, and that transparency goes a long way. So one sentence about when you make a gift to the XYZ fund, you will help us achieve ABC. That can build a lot of confidence that goes a long way. Next slide. So a lot of people start sitting at their computer with a story in hand, but we usually whiteboard, scratch paper, map this thing out. And we really write down a bunch of messages that we want to share, and then focus and prioritize those messages into 3. And then we pick one hero message and use the other 2 as supporting messages. So I'm sharing for Tanner and Caleb the 3 messages we landed on, where Children's Health has the ability to care for every child in our region, no matter what their diagnosis. And the supporting ones, where doctors and nurses don't just treat kids with medicine, they know their patients and help them live their healthiest and happiest life. And finally, about giving, when you make a gift to Children's, you ensure that kids like Tanner and Caleb get life-saving care they need all year long. And so giving really should support your story instead of smash in your face, put that pressure on. We're all going to get a number of emails that say, Give Big is happening, mark your calendar. It's Give Big in 2 weeks. Did you know Give Big is on its way? And so if we can lead with a story, donors will give because they know Give Big is happening. Next slide. And looking at mapping out your story, once you've landed on those key messages, you've got your hero. That could be the animals in the habitats that depend on clean spaces to live and the ecosystems that we don't want destroyed. It could be people, or it could be our enemy, a terrible disease that's out there that we want to support people in. But I made up a environmental nonprofit and just thought of a couple of ways to say, hey, Give Big is happening before Give Big happened. And so we all are going to do our save the dates, but what if instead of Give Big, save the date, you just said, hi, I'm Allie the orca, and introduced yourself. And your next one was why clean rivers are important to me. And maybe right before Give Big, please give big for salmon. I'm hungry. And that is a little bit less pressure on the donor and a little bit more interesting to read. But when I have my story, then I truly get a big piece of paper, 11 by 17, and I break that story into boxes. I might write the whole story and then find those places to break and where that will work if I can build on it. And I map it out over the whole series until the very last one, when I get to say, thank you for all your support. You really helped us a lot. And we're excited to tell you about what your gifts have done for us. Next slide. My next tip is, before you sit down to write your emails, all of those ideas are running through your head, all of the points you need to make about your cause, your programs, and your strategic priorities you want to touch. Pause and ask yourself what you want people to feel. Write those feelings down, not just your stats or your fundraising goals. And if you screenshot one more slide, let it be this one. If you don't have voice and tone guidelines for how your organization talks about itself, don't worry, most people don't. But when our partners, when our nonprofits don't have those, we look to their values. And so I made these ones up as well. But I just wrote some sample intros based on what a Give Big email could be, a story could be. So the first one is from a teacher, and that using optimistic, innovative, and compassionate as your values. I thought if I were a teacher, I would say, every day when I come to work, I'm excited to see my students. Their creativity and thoughtfulness inspires me to think about my opportunity as their teacher to open their minds. For every one of my students, I want them to see the wonders of math and enjoy the journey books can take them on. And that's what I'm trying to do, and we're trying to do at Message Lab, is use those values and elevate those feelings so that your readers really connect and are inspired to give instead of feeling like they're being asked to give. So screenshot this one and we'll jump to the next, unless anyone wants to pause for questions.
And feel free to put anything in the chat if you don't want to speak it out loud, and I will bring it to Allie's attention. You ready for the next slide, Allie?
Yeah, I also, actually, I'm going to read this one too, because we've been working with Bailey Boucher House, which is an extension of Virginia Mason, and they're one of my favorite organizations in our region. And I've written so many stories for them from the volunteer perspective, from the donor perspective, from the social worker, and from the beneficiary. And I just never stop being inspired by this place. And so as their values are acceptance, inclusion, and collaboration, I just drafted like some notes from what I think and feel and know about them. And so here's a story that like is similar to one that we wrote. When I was homeless, I was sure that no one cared about me. I didn't just lose my home, I lost my sense of place. But when I walked into Bailey Boucher House, the tense, constant uncertainty I felt day after day was gone. Being given my first meal and sitting at a table in a warm, clean place was surreal. It was the first step toward my future and my appreciation for their support and belief in me. They helped me get an apartment and I'm working in a grocery store. And so instead of telling your program about what your programs do and your strategic priorities and your stats, think of telling a story like this, because I think it does all of those things and maybe even better. We'll go to next slide.
They've got a question here before we jump on. So Jennifer asks, do you interview people and then write the first person messages based on what you learned from them?
Yeah, jump to the next slide and I will tell you all about it.
Good timing. Here we go.
So yeah, we interview everyone who we feature. It's really hard to be in the position that we're in because telling someone else's story is a really personal experience, and every one of the individuals that we feature, they're doing so willingly and putting it out there for the world to see. And oftentimes we're interviewing them and asking them about the hardest time in their life. It's really complex, and I used to review scholarship letters from students, and there was a lot of hesitancy to be personal and authentic because we don't really know each other. But our team really focuses on ensuring that everyone we interview and everyone who is sharing their story with us feels empowered and like they're in a space to tell us that they want to change something, they do want to include something, or they don't want to include something. We lead with every introduction and conversation to say, this is your story, this isn't mine, and this isn't the organization's. So you're in the driver's seat, and whatever you want to say is the right thing to say. So, and also for us, we kind of advocate for first person because it's just so much more meaningful for someone to see their story and feel like it's authentic when it's in their voice. So we do an interview, usually it takes between 30 minutes and an hour. And we try and make the process as easy on our interviewees as possible. So we do the heavy lifting. After they chat with us, we go back and write the story, we write the emails, and then they review everything in very first draft. They get to strike, make changes. They could even say, you know what, actually, I don't feel comfortable sharing my story right now. I thought about it. I don't want it to be on an email list of 8,000 people, and that's okay. So we also try and focus on the positive, and that's really important because we don't want people to feel like when they're sharing the hardest moments of their life, that they're anything but resilient and strong and smart people. And so when we lead with hope and talk about from their perspective, all that they've achieved, it really sets up our readers and our organization to celebrate the dignity of the people that we serve. So does that answer the question? And I'll just say in one other thing, when we do an interview, and when we tell a story in a Giving Day campaign like this, we use it for at least 2 or 3 other pieces. So when we do that interview, that story will go on the website. That story will be in your annual report or your newsletter. It will be featured on social media, maybe not just for GiveBIG. In fact, hopefully not just for GiveBIG, but we will set you up, or I like to set people up to have a really long shelf life, because it's a lot of work to put these together. So one story can go a long way. Next slide, or any questions on that? Alrighty. So the next one I kind of talked about before, but get creative, get fun. We all do a lot of serious stuff. It's really heavy, really, really heavy. Working with foster kids is complex. But what if you just started an email with, my foster family is my family? Or you had fun and said, look at all the legs on that starfish. I'd rather open an email for that than it's time for our annual GiveBIG campaign. And so these are just some small little ideas. Don't make the reader do any work. That's a motto we live by. One of our writers said that to me 5 or 6 years ago when I was probably making something far too complex. She said, Allie, it's our job to not make the reader do any work. They shouldn't have to fill in the gaps or do any hard thinking. They should feel and connect with what you're saying. And sent me back and said, start over, because we aren't just writers, we're editors for each other. And so I hope for all of you guys that you don't feel the pressure to just write this yourself. Have someone else look at it, have someone else mark it up, ask questions, and do what you can to not make your reader do a ton of hard work. Just ask them to think, or just ask them to feel and connect with your story. Next slide. Here are your secondary opportunities. And so I think of here are all the ways I tell people who are skeptical of GiveBIG campaign or Giving Tuesday. And I've made this case for a lot of nonprofits that just say, it's so much work. And I say, just do that one interview. And here's a list of all the ways that this one story, this one ask can grow and become a significant piece of work that will help you for months and months to come. And maybe you even do the story and it's in your newsletter 6 months ahead of time, and then plan to use that story in your GiveBIG. So I'm sure some of you are feeling skeptical, and I understand your skepticism. I get skepticism every day from my girl Emma and my chicken. When they look at me like, what are you doing? What are you thinking? You're crazy. But I think it's a great opportunity to connect with your donors, and especially ask them to give at a time where they haven't really thought about you as much as they have during other parts of the year. I think that might be it. Well, oh, I have a slide on questions.
I'm sorry about that. I pushed
That's
the wrong
okay.
button, lost it. I'll bring it back.
If you want, I encourage everyone to go look at the children's health story about Tanner and Caleb, watch it 4, 5, or 6 times because you will be inspired. Oh, it's the next slide. And I do that all the time. I go to the places where I like the work. I like the feeling. I like the tone. And even someone that's like not connected to the work that we're doing right now, if that's an environmental organization or someone that helps with career development, I might go back to healthcare or just find something that you really like and unpack the way they wrote that story and use it as a guide for yourself. Because we got really fun. When we met them, when we met these kids, we were like, oh, this is gonna be great because their personalities will shine. So I hope that's what you can do also for whoever you feature, is help them feel really proud, because a big goal for me when I was in stewardship was to really make the experience of being featured a really good one, almost the like best part of their partnership with your organization, because usually they're being featured because they've gone, patients or families, kids, adults have gone through something really hard and they're on the other side of it. And this opportunity to be featured can be really empowering and they can feel really good and strong, especially if they want to tell that story. So as much as I want to steward and cultivate our donors, I want to steward and cultivate the people who willingly open themselves up to sharing their story on our organization's behalf. Any questions? Also, if you have any questions and you're writing and you're stuck, feel free to email me. I'm happy to jump on a call for 10 or 15 minutes and you can share your screen and say, my email is 300 words and I can't get it down, and I'll brainstorm it with you. That's a really fun part of my continued learning, and same with the rest of our team. We love those challenges. And I might tap in someone else who on our team who has written a lot about the area that you work in, and it just helps us learn too. So happy to help.
That is an incredible offer, Allie. Thank you so much. We'll come back to that in just a moment. We have a message from Jessica Franz at BirdNote, and they say, can you share the kinds of questions you use in interviews to get the kind of responses that would be needed to build an appeal letter around?
Yeah, because we will use that one interview to then be a year-end appeal or anything really, especially if it's connected to a certain month or some other event. We try and go in with a few questions, especially based on the person's background and what we know about them. So we get a brief usually that says, here's Tanner and Caleb. They have cystic fibrosis. Cystic fibrosis means they suffer from a really complicated lung and digestive system condition, and here's how it affects them. Here's their experience with our organization. And then we meet them and we try and not make them feel like they're sitting across from a scary journalist. We first ask them, tell us about you. What do you like to do? Because more than being connected to this organization, they have an entire life outside of being connected to this organization. And we don't want anyone to feel like they're just that. They're just a patient. So that's how we get to know them. And that usually opens up the conversation to a lot. But instead of saying really specific, asking really specific questions, we usually say, tell me about, can you tell me about a time when you had an experience with a social worker that really took a hard day and turned it all the way around? Or can you tell me about what it was like to finish this program? And so the tell me about kind of opens you up to a really long narrative that explains the what and the how. And a follow-up question is, what did that feel like? And that usually is when the person, sorry, who you're interviewing might get emotional, but emotion is good. And not because we can use it, to get more gifts, but we can use it to really fully understand the impact that your organization has had on their life. Hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah, I think somebody said something there. Go ahead.
I was just saying thank you. That's really helpful.
Great. And Yolanda, hello. Yolanda Morris said, thanks for the information. Guides and tools are really helpful. Could you please speak more about how you choose one story and how you break it down into the components to assemble the story for an email, social, or website?
Yeah, so we usually try and have every story, if we can. I mean, there are times where an organization would ask us just to write something for an email campaign, and we would say, yeah, sure, that's okay, but what if we wrote a really, really long story that had all the information there? And then you use that story in those interviews to break it apart when you need something for that channel. And oftentimes, because we've done an interview, we get a lot of extra information, and we can go back to that client and say, you know what, I just learned about how they also participated in this area of your organization or attended this program. And we kind of use it as a starting place to see all the different places that the story can go. And so we're also thinking about that as writers, how many uses you can get out of this story. And I did that a lot when I was running a stewardship program. And I leaned on my writers to hear and listen for those things so that they could come back to me and we could say, okay, we did this one interview. I don't have to pay you to interview someone else. We already have a relationship with them. We have all the information we need. But what if we tweak the story, 60 degrees and told it in a way that highlights a completely different area than, their direct patient care or what they originally came here for? And that can just open you up to, honestly, I would just storyboard it. I would get on a whiteboard and say, who can we feature and what are all the different pieces of their story and the way they're connected to us? It's less of a hard science and more of an artistic science where there are lots of arrows and underlines and crossing things out. But I think people sit down at their computer and decide to write the appeals, write the story. And so taking a bunch of steps back and writing the story, thinking about all the ways, or doing the interview and walking away from the interview and thinking about all the ways you can now use it, will get you a lot more bang for your buck on the time you put in. Because this work takes a lot of time. Then you have to go build things, and then you have to get the data and have to make sure all the links work and test everything. And so it's a lot. And sometimes writing the actual things is what we leave to the last minute. And that's hopefully what maybe you won't do. Hopefully you're thinking about a story right now that's really exciting and you want to share. I would even say repurpose something from your breakfast. If you did a video for your breakfast, go back to the interview and get it transcribed and use that for your Give Day campaign or your luncheon or whatever event you've done. Because you've asked all those questions, you've got the emotions, and now you can put it back into a digital campaign.
Allie, there's another question here from
Sure.
Jenny. What's your recommendation for adapting story content for socials? I'd imagine you probably don't recommend writing from the first person for social. Does that
Yeah,
make
that's
sense?
different. Sometimes we have seen it done where it's just one quote, and then your social post leads with a very strong, hopefully pretty short quote, and then your programmatic support is under that, or your organizational sort of message is under that. We are not yet experts in social. I partner with the social teams to make sure they have all the assets. So they have the interview transcripts, they have the whole story that they can just, copy and paste. We're thinking about adding a social media person to our team because that is a whole changing, evolving area. But hopefully if you can take all of those great quotes or all of those ideas, you can switch anything to third person and say, Tanner and Caleb came to our hospital when another hospital told their mom and dad that they would likely not live to see middle school. But instead, mom and dad didn't give up. They came to us. Today, Tanner and Caleb are talking about where they want to go to college. You can switch anything to third person for sure. And that might be better for social.
We have time for more questions. This is a great opportunity, folks, for you to help your organization tell its story. Allie has also offered her services after this. You could write to her. I'll let her finish that and tell about that. But just anything in the question for you have right now.
I just
Yeah.
looked in the chat because I hadn't been looking at it. And someone asked, how do you approach the conversation with asking someone to be an interviewee or highlight their story? And this is truly one of my favorite questions to ask. You have dozens of people who want to share their story and how your organization has been transformational and meaningful in their life or in their family's life. And they often want to use that role, their role and this opportunity to be in a position of gratitude for you. But like I said before, we never want to pressure. We would never ask someone to tell their story. I think that's the strong relationships that you have with your program staff, or the strong relationships that you even have with your donors. If they can be a person to tell a story, to say, let me tell you why I think this place is amazing and the work I've seen them do. It could be a volunteer who says, I spend my time here and this is why. Every day I arrive here, I get more by giving my time for myself than what the people I get to work with get. And there are lots of ways to identify, but program staff are a great way. And because whoever they're working with probably trusts them. And as long as they lead with saying, your story is pretty darn incredible. We think it's so inspiring and we're so proud of you. And if you're interested, we'd love to share it with others. But that should always come with you don't have to, that's not your job. And we also have done a lot of stuff with families or individuals who really need to feel protected, because whatever situation they're in is really vulnerable. And so we have changed names. We have not included photos. We can do a lot of different things, but most importantly, it's like respecting that person and the vulnerability of putting your story out there. But it's surprising how often people say yes. I interviewed a scholarship student for a local university earlier this week, and he was like, I can't believe they asked me. And I said to him, are you kidding? Your story is incredible, and you have a really strong voice, and anyone who has ever given to this university will see the investment that their gift is more than a gift. It's truly an investment. And you are living proof of that. And this is your moment. Tell them how great you are.
Hey, Allie, what tips do you have in preparing for those interviews, or how do you usually go about that?
Yeah, so I don't have a ton of experience working in smaller nonprofits that I need to go to program staff, but working in healthcare, it's sort of similar, or in higher ed, where you talk to those faculty or you talk to those nurses and physicians. And in healthcare, it's a little bit different because, and even working with kids, it's all different because there's a lot of protected information that is not legal or appropriate for me to know. And so oftentimes we'll have someone come to us, or I would at the hospital, and they'd say, we have this amazing family. We really think that this story would be wonderful, and we just are impressed by their character and yada, yada. And so we'd say, awesome, we'd love to feature them. Would you like to have a conversation with them? And then we do a get to know you call if they say yes. And we get to know a little bit about them. We can talk to the person who knows them best. And that background information, it's like the pre-interview, it's the research. We don't want to go into any interview, or you don't, not knowing how old a kid is, and know that they're not, and tell me about how amazing 5th grade was. And they're like, I'm in 7th grade now. So it's as much as we can connect with the people who are closest to them after we've been given the green light that they're in. Is that helpful? I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, I think that is helpful. And you mentioned you would you've already shared like some of the questions you asked. I guess just deciding on those too, and like how to focus the conversation, or like even adapt as the interview is going.
Oh, that's the best, most fun part. It's less of an interview and more of a conversation, because you as the person interviewing them know so much about this organization, and they know so much. And so with all that background information, I definitely map out stories, especially if I map out questions and think about what I want. I always end every interview with, is there something I haven't asked you that I should have? And is there something about your story that you really want to see emphasized and highlighted, so I can make that happen? But usually it's just, if we can approach it as a conversation, they lead themselves. And I've had a few writers, especially ones that come from journalism backgrounds, not ask, like they ask a question and then they're just done and they move to the next question. But as an interviewer and as someone who's curious, I almost rarely get through all of my questions because they've said something that's so interesting and so compelling, that I'm like, well, tell me more about that. Well, then how did it start? Well, like, let's go back and think about, you know, what it was like before you started working or started coming here, to this, you know, program. And it all builds itself around that. And so I'd say the follow-up questions, and keeping it like a conversation, you'll get the best content. And the last question, is there anything I didn't ask you that I should have? Like about 25% of the time, there is something that I missed because I didn't know, or we just didn't get to. And the conversation didn't evolve that way, that is monumental for the story.
That's great.
Thank you.
Excellent. So thank you all. We're gonna formally end the conversation here, but I'm happy to stick around. Allie, you gonna stay with us for a minute?
Yeah, I can hang out.
We can hang out here. We're gonna stop the recording right now, but please do stay in touch with us. Come back to the GiveBIG website as much as possible. There are many dates coming up and more trainings. And thank you for coming today.
Yeah.
And let me
Thanks
get
for
this turned off and we'll hang on with you for just a few minutes here. Anybody have any other questions? Apparently not. I don't see anything. Seeing folks still hanging on here.
Oh, someone asked, will there be a webinar for social media? If you create that, I will attend.
That's great. I'm gonna stop.